Hey, welcome. Today, we're diving into something that's, well, it's both fascinating and incredibly important. We're talking about how the media doesn't just show us war, it actually shapes our entire understanding of it. And believe me, it's a complicated relationship with some really huge consequences. So let me just ask you this right off the bat. When you see footage of a conflict on the news, what are you really watching? Is it a straight-up report on what's happening? Or has it been packaged, to keep you glued to the screen? Almost like entertainment? That question right there is at the very heart of everything we're going to explore. Because here's the central idea for today. The media isn't some passive window that we just look through to see the world. Nope, it's an active participant. It literally builds our reality of a conflict through the stories it picks, the images it decides to show us, and the specific words it uses. And this whole thing creates this wild paradox. On one hand, the media can turn war into this massive spectacle, right? Something that feels huge, visceral, and super urgent. But then, on the other hand, the exact same media can trivialize it, making conflicts seem distant, almost like a video game or just more background noise in our already crazy lives. And these two forces, they're constantly pulling our perception in totally opposite directions. All right, so let's dig into that first part of the paradox. How exactly does a real-life conflict get turned into a compelling, can't-look-away kind of show? And this isn't some new thing. Technology has always been the engine driving this. I mean, you go back to the first war correspondents sending out their dispatches, then to World War II and state-run propaganda films meant to rally everyone together, all the way to the Vietnam War, which brought the battlefield into people's living rooms for the very first time. And today, wow. We've got 24/7 live news and incredible drone footage, making the spectacle more intense and immediate than ever before. So how does this actually work? To really get our heads around how the media builds this whole spectacle, there are a few really powerful ideas from media studies that are super helpful. First up, we've got something called agenda-setting theory. Now, the key thing to get here is that the media doesn't necessarily tell us what to think, but by choosing what to cover, it for sure tells us what to think about. For instance, take the relationship between Iran and the US. If news channels are constantly, day in and day out, covering military buildups in the Persian Gulf, that issue shoots to the top of the public agenda. It starts to feel like the most urgent problem we face, even if other things might be just as critical. And that leads us right into our next big idea, framing theory. See, this is all about how the story gets told. The specific words, the images they choose, the experts they bring on, all of it can completely change our emotional response. Think about it. Is a military action a preemptive strike for safety, or is it a provocative incursion that's just making things worse? The frame they use basically dictates how we're supposed to feel about it. And all of this ties into one last concept, cultivation theory. The idea here is that if you're constantly soaking in this dramatized, high-stakes coverage of global conflict, over time you might just start to believe that the world is a much more dangerous, hostile place than it really is. The media exposure literally cultivates a certain way of seeing the world. But hey, it's not just a bunch of academic theories. A huge part of the spectacle, and let's be real, a huge driver of ratings, is the pure visual wow factor of military technology. I mean, these high-def shots of fighter jets, massive naval carriers, and super advanced drones, they're visually stunning. And that wow factor can be so captivating that it just overshadows the complicated strategies and maybe most importantly, the real human cost of using all that hardware. Okay, so now we're going to flip the script completely and look at the other side of this paradox. How is it possible that something so spectacular can also become, well, trivial? How does war get boiled down to just background noise? Well, the whole problem really kicks off with something we all know too well: information overload. We are just so flooded with news from every single direction that the constant stream actually starts to dull our ability to think critically about any one thing. Just think about it for a second. You've got the ticker running at the bottom of a 24/7 news channel, the endless scroll of your social media feed, the constant push notifications buzzing on your phone, viral clips being shared with zero context. When news about a major conflict comes at us in these tiny, fragmented little bursts, we just get desensitized. That constant alarm bell eventually just becomes a dull hum in the background. And this desensitization leads to something the source material calls the gamification of conflict. Geopolitical tensions get presented like a chess match or a football game. The focus is all on the strategic moves, who's winning, who's losing. But when you frame it like that, it's so easy to forget that the pieces on that board are actual human lives, and the consequences are devastatingly real. Empathy just gets totally lost in the game. All right, so let's put this all together and see how these two big forces, the spectacle and the trivialization, play out in a real-world case study: the media's coverage of the long and complicated tensions between Iran and the United States. I mean, this is a perfect example of framing theory in action. These two phrases could be describing the exact same military event. But preemptive strike sounds defensive, almost necessary. Provocative incursion, on the other hand, sounds aggressive and dangerous. The whole narrative is shaped for you before you even get to the fact. And when we talk about trivialization, this slide just lays it out so clearly. Take economic sanctions. They're often reported as a clean or bloodless tool of politics. We hear all about the strategic goals on the left, maximum pressure, curbing ambitions, but what gets trivialized or just plain ignored is the heartbreaking human cost you see on the right: severe shortages of medicine, widespread food insecurity, and just crushing economic hardship for millions of ordinary people. The strategic game totally buries the human suffering. So, what are we supposed to do with all this information? How do we navigate this incredibly complicated media world, especially today? Let's talk about what this means for you. You've probably heard this term, the post-truth era. It's this idea that we're living in a time where emotional appeals and our own personal beliefs can often feel more powerful than objective facts. And this makes it even easier for that spectacle and trivialization to grab hold, because we often go looking for media that just confirms what we already think, instead of challenging our perspective. So, what can you actually do? Well, it all comes down to being a more critical consumer of news. And here's a little toolkit: 3 simple but really powerful steps. First, try to identify the frame. Just ask yourself, how is this story being presented to me? Second, question the source. Ask, who actually benefits from me seeing the world this particular way? And third, and this is so important, always seek out the human cost. Look for the stories and the voices that are being left out of the strategic game. Which really just leaves us with this final question. The next time you turn on the news and see a story about some global conflict, what are you going to be looking for? The dazzling spectacle of power and strategy? Or the complicated, messy human reality that's hiding underneath it all? The choice really is yours. Thanks for tuning in.